Joined now by Jeff Paterson, one half of the Rink Wide duo with Andrew Wadden, and boy, were they busy this weekend. Alas, Jeff, I'm not sure how much time we're going to spend on the Panthers or Hurricanes games.
Exactly.
Given everything that is happening in the Canucks world, but let's start with the most important matter. We lost a Canucks legend yesterday. We lost him at far too early an age, at age 52. I saw you tweeting about him last night. I know you and Andrew spent time last night on Rink Wide, the post-game show, as much on Gino Odjick as on a terrific comeback win, actually, against the Carolina Hurricanes. You watched him his whole career here in Vancouver. Jeff, your thoughts and emotions about the passing of Gino Odjick?
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. It's always sad when you lose anybody, but especially somebody as beloved as Gino. And look, he passed the one-name test. Like, I think that tells you just about everything. If you look in the history of the world, people that are known by one name, it tells you that they've made a mark. And all you had to say was Gino, and people in this market knew exactly who you were talking about and what you were talking about, and there will never be another Gino. There may be other people named Gino in this market, but there's only ever going to be one Gino. And so, in some way, we thought we were losing him. What was it, 8 years ago? I think 2014. And so, it was a remarkable comeback. I tweeted out that I still saw him at the rink. He was a regular at Rogers Arena right down to the end. And there he was up in the media area. Usually would watch the games in the alumni suite, but up and down the elevators with him. And, always a nod and a smile. And, hey, Gino, how's it going? And, he broke into the National Hockey League before I got into the media, and I started in Kamloops in 1993. So I was at broadcast school, really a fan at that point, and how could you not fall in love with this guy that arrived on the scene, literally fought his way into the National Hockey League and into the hearts of Canuck fans, and just to hear so many tributes from his teammates, and that word there too, teammate. Like, they all just raved about, a guy that had their back and understood his role, and, in an era of heavyweights. It's incredible. I was looking, like, Luke Schenn leads the Canucks this season with 58 penalty minutes, and I was looking last night, Gino had 54 PIMs in his first 5 games in the National Hockey League. Different era, I get it, but that debut, like, honestly, his debut against Chicago and fighting Dave Manson and Stu Grimson, it's almost on par with Pavel Bure's debut.
Right.
Like, yeah. And that's just nuts to say, but people hold it in that same esteem, and so the lore of the arrival of Gino and taking on two of the toughest customers at the time in the National Hockey League, wearing number 66 while doing it in his Canuck debut, and then, of course, switching to 29, which became the more familiar number for him. But, guys, when we talk about numbers and Gino, these ones just, and again, it speaks to a different time in hockey. I get all of that. But hockeyfights.com says that he threw down 127 times as a member of the Vancouver Canucks, including 33 in one season alone.
And how many times did it go into the double dips? How many times he fought 2 guys at once? Because that would be that should be worth triple.
And as Jeff points out, never be another Gino, and the game has changed. But also just that figure, that ominous, imposing enforcer, tough guy figure coming into the club, that is something that I don't think we're going to see anymore going forward in the National Hockey League. Because let's face it, those players aren't being targeted anymore for NHL duty. You've got to be at the very least Tom Wilson.
Even back then, guys, a lot of the time these real characters in hockey proliferated on bad teams because they sort of promoted it a little bit, right? Like they needed another act, sort of, because they were rebuilding. They weren't that good. The fact that Gino was able to do his thing, rise to the prominence, be an effective hockey player on a contender, and remember they underachieved in the regular season of '94, but they were a good team the previous year. This was a good team, and Gino was able to stay with it and play pretty much every night in the regular season at the very least.
Well, and that year he scored 16 goals. Like, 16 goals in today's world, you're getting paid. 16 goals and 29 assists. He also played 10 of the playoff games on the run to the Stanley Cup. And I was thinking to myself, I want to see a breakdown. Like, did he play all of the games against Calgary because of the rivalry and they wanted to have a heavyweight? The answer is no. He actually played more. He played half of his 10 games in the postseason against Toronto that year. The third round. He played 5 games against the Leafs. I think that series went 5 games, if I'm not mistaken. And so he played 3 against Calgary, 2 against Dallas, and then all 5 against the Leafs. Didn't play in the Stanley Cup final. But to say that he could only play in the first round, or they only trusted him in the first round, not true. Not true at all. He ended up playing 5 of his 10 postseason games that year in the third round as the Canucks punched their ticket to the Stanley Cup final. For him to get inducted into the BC Sports Hall of Fame, incredible. I know that there's been a lot of talk about, did they miss the boat not having him in the Ring of Honor, and that's another discussion for another day probably. But the friendship with Pavel, like the ultimate odd couple, and just how those two hit it off and arrived on the scene sort of within a year of each other and were these best of buddies, and it didn't make sense in the moment, and yet it's a friendship that endured. And again, when I talk about the single name and the chant of Gino, I don't know, can you guys think of anybody else in this market that's ever had people rally outside a hospital chanting their name? But it just spoke to sort of the impact that he had on this fan base, and people didn't want to see him go in 2014, and the best news, I guess, there is that we got 8 more years of Gino. Gone too soon at 52, but was able to fight Father Time. And no surprise. I mean, he was a fighter through and through, and so he wasn't ready back then, but unfortunately, got the call yesterday.
We just got a note from a listener too, guys. It's a fabulous idea. All this Free the Skate stuff. We know that it's coming. Do you bring it back on Wednesday night to honor Gino Odjick? I don't think that was the original timeline for Freeing the Skate, but maybe they rush it a little bit here, given the circumstances.
Well, it's usually pretty involved. It's got to involve the league and the other team, but, you've got
it's happening this year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and even yesterday, and I know that they've sort of been playing with it and the banner and the bus ads, and yesterday they had the plant in the stands. I don't know. I mean, when they showed the woman in the stands with the skate jersey and the sign yesterday, there was also an ad for tickets for the Tampa game on Wednesday. I'm not convinced that it's not happening on Wednesday already. But wouldn't that be incredible timing?
Yes, it is.
And what a way to honor Gino. And we saw Gino skate out ahead of the 50th anniversary season when he actually put the skates and the uniform on again, and that drew a roar. And I can only imagine. Canucks game presentation, they do a terrific job with all of these ceremonies and tributes, and I'm sure they will for Gino as well. And that building will be rocking to hear, the chants of Gino one more time. So, I don't know if it's going to happen as far as the skate jersey goes, but I do know that there will be some real energy in the building on Wednesday when Tampa's in town.
All right, Jeff, moving along, we had a press conference from Jim Rutherford today. I think in some parts he was the Jim Rutherford of a year ago who seemed to bring a sort of calming and more reassuring voice to everything Canucks. In other parts, maybe the Straight Talk Express stuff led to a little more alarm. You tell me, in totality, what did we hear from the president of hockey operations, and do you think it will help or hurt calm the waters here amongst an angry public?
Yeah, well, just first, the theater of it all, guys. Mid-season, to be flanked by 2 doctors about a player. Let's be honest, Tanner Pearson, a veteran, a liked veteran in that locker room. This isn't Connor McDavid. This isn't Alex Ovechkin. I can't recall a general manager flanked by 2 of the team's top medical professionals in mid-season to address what's gone on with Tanner Pearson, but clearly that speaks to the seriousness of this story that has exploded over the last week. And then the doctors didn't say much. We really didn't get a lot. They claimed, because of client privacy issues, and I understand all of that. But then the doctors were summarily dismissed, and then Jim was like, bring it on, let's go. And I was unable to be in attendance, but I was proud of our media colleagues. I thought the questions that were asked were the ones that had to be asked. They were pointed, they were direct. Jim Rutherford did not duck or dodge, but where to begin? Admitting that, yes, he has talked to replacements for Bruce Boudreau already. That was a staggering admission that they just can't afford Bo Horvat, that their final offer, and they think they've made their best offer is below what Bo's going to get. And so basically the president of hockey operations was running the white towel up on retaining the captain. I don't see how you get past that and think that Bo Horvat can remain a Canuck past the trade deadline. There was the admission that they have contracts that they just cannot move. That and we know who they are, and we've been talking about them for a while, and I think Tanner Pearson probably was one of them. But now he's in a separate category with the medical issues. He pointed to the Colorado game recently, as we all did. I mean, they beat the Stanley Cup champions 4-2 on home ice before the road trip, and he talked about that being a team performance. And then he said, we have to play like a team. We haven't played like a team enough. Well, he's the man in charge, and that was another takeaway of mine was if there was any doubt who is calling the shots with this operation these days, at least below the ownership level, this is the man in charge. Patrick Allvin is the general manager. You heard in that report with the Pittsburgh media last week where Jim said Patrick does the day-to-day, makes the phone calls with the other GMs and those types of things. But the buck clearly stops with Jim Rutherford. And so, he talked again, though, about sort of retooling, didn't want to go down the road of rebuild, talked about finding players that maybe needed a second chance. And, some of that kind of stuff reminded me of the last Jim that was in charge. Yep. And we've been there and done that. So, there was the one line where he said, I like a challenge, and man, I've got a challenge on my hands. It summed it up, but it also just the depth and breadth of the issues that were addressed today. If somebody came from the outside and saw the president of hockey operations standing there at the podium or sitting at a table, as it was, fielding these questions on so many issues and so many levels, like it just underscores what a mess this is and how much work ultimately there still is. He was presented with a 3-year time frame, and I think he was expecting it to be half of that when the question was posed, and said 3 years. Yeah, no, that seems fair. So again, we're putting timelines on how quickly this can get turned around and moving in the right direction and all of that. But my sort of overall takeaway is that when management doesn't speak to the media or to the fans through the media for these long stretches in a market like this one, it just builds and builds and builds to the point where Jim Rutherford had to field questions for the better part of 45 minutes, had to wave off his public relations crew who at one point tried to... absolutely. Yeah. No, a ton of credit for... it would have been easy for Jim Rutherford after 20 minutes just to say, I've said enough, I'm done, let's do this again. But that is, for me, there's a lesson in all of this. Do it again. Do it every couple of weeks in a market like this one. It was professional. Everybody was adult in the room. I don't think anybody's feelings were hurt. The questions that needed to get asked got asked. He provided answers, sometimes a little too honestly, perhaps. But it was a great exercise, but it was incredible theater just because it started with doctors and the medical update on Tanner Pearson and then touched on just about every other level of this organization, top to bottom. Rutherford got into... Podkolzin had to go regain his confidence. Hoaglander had to work on his turnovers, he says, about a guy that was sent to the minors. Nils Hamon needed to touch the puck a little bit more. So he top to bottom, he likes what they've got going down in Abbotsford, as they should. That's the one area within the operation that does seem to have some positives going for it. But again, it just, to me, I kind of walked away from that trying to catch my breath because there were a lot of topics covered. A lot of areas that we've all kind of been wondering about. And ultimately, I don't know that I feel any better about the short or long-term prognosis of the hockey club, but it just underscores that Bruce Boudreau is not in the long-term plans, and apparently neither is Bo Horvat.
That's the problem, is that I don't think anybody walks
3 years away, and we've already wasted a year.
I don't think people walk away from this press conference feeling like they now know the direction and plan any better. And I think it's because he's mixing his metaphors a little bit. He wants to call it a retool, but he also said it's major surgery. And he wasn't referring to Pearson. He's talking about the team. Mm-hmm. A major surgery does not sound like a retool. That sounds like minor surgery.
Yeah, and it's just so unfortunate that he had to use that term today of all days. Honestly, you can't make this kind of stuff up, that he dismisses the doctors and then he says, yeah, we need major surgery. And I just kind of put my hands on my head and thought, no, don't say that today of all days. You're right. I mean, on one hand, he talked up the players they've got. Lots of good players. But then he also talked about these contracts that are unmovable and that they may have to just wait. until these contracts expire. But then in the same breath, he said, there's probably going to be some buyouts here this offseason. So, that kind of caught my attention too. And it all starts, he admitted, he said, I haven't done a good job. That when he came here, he talked about creating cap flexibility. He used cap cushion that first press conference. And ultimately, here they are. Rutherford's been on the job more than a year. Alvin's coming up on his first anniversary in days. And they've done nothing to create any sort of cap flexibility. And it all has to start with a first move somehow, some way. And the first moves they undertook were re-upping with Besser, going out and getting Mikheyev, and then recommitting to JT Miller. And so they've taken on more and sort of backed themselves even further into the corner. We're still waiting to see, what is that first move that's going to create a little bit of cap flexibility? And then from there, you've got some wriggle room, and hopefully you can build on all of that as we get closer to the trade deadline. But maybe the Horvat move is going to be the first shoe to drop here. Who knows?
Have you ever had a hockey executive admit that they're talked to replacement candidates for a coach who has yet to be fired, and then have to say, but the people we've talked to know it's clear we don't want to make a change? Well,
I've talked to candidates about a coaching job that I don't have open right now, is kind of the way he went. And look, he was trying to be honest, but again, It goes back to my point that we just haven't heard from him in a while, and the horse has been out of the barn here. The Canucks, this is the incredible part for me. They're the lead item on Hockey Night in Canada every week, but you pick other national outlets who haven't focused on the Canucks, and why should they when you look at where they are in the standings? But the Canucks are front page news around the National Hockey League for all the wrong reasons, and so the Boudreau story's out there, the Tocchet story is out there. Jim was basically put on the hot seat at that point. You either lie when you're asked if you've talked to candidates, and then after the fact, if it comes out, then that's not a good look on somebody in charge. And trust me, people in this market keep receipts. So he elected to be honest, but that's a tough look. And, Bruce is our coach now, and that's all he would offer. And sure enough, Bruce Boudreau remains the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks. And I think the danger here now, guys, is, and we talked about this briefly on Rink Wide last night, is that if you allow Bruce Boudreau to coach home games, and we talked about the energy and the emotion that's going to be in the building likely on Wednesday with a tribute to Gino, what if this fan base just decides that what's happening on the ice doesn't matter, and they want to back the coach and take his side in all of this and let management and ownership know that they don't care for the treatment that Bruce Boudreau is getting? We've heard this crowd rise up to support Bruce Boudreau a number of times, not much this year because they haven't won much this year. But, I could see it getting a little dicey in the management and ownership box if we keep hearing the Bruce there it is chants and those types of things. I think Bruce has the fan base on his side, and he's kind of won the PR war in all of this. And he's a decent human being, and he's not getting treated particularly well right now. And to have, to have his replacement basically dangling out there over him. And you saw yesterday in Carolina, I know we say we wouldn't talk about the games much, and we won't, but when Brock Besser tied that game, you saw emotion. The players were playing hard. And when Paterson does the Forsberg and wins in the shootout, again, they pour off the bench. Bo Horvat waiting for each and every guy as they funneled off the ice and high fives and hugs. There hasn't been much winning. There hadn't been on the road trip. But they continued to play hard, and they do for Bruce Boudreau. Do they break down? Yes. Way too often. Can they kill penalties? No, although they did kill both yesterday against the Hurricanes. But look, it's a flawed group. We know that much. But there haven't been many nights where they've gone quietly. And I do think that they continue to play hard for Bruce Boudreau. And as we said, so much of this is the flawed roster that he inherited. And he was able to make chicken soup out of it last year. Unfortunately, it's gone the other direction this time around.
Chicken soup, not chicken salad, huh, Jeff?
I guess you make chicken soup's for the soul, right?
Yes.
Chicken salad is the other option.
Good.
Okay, yes, I'm mixing my metaphors now.
No, excellent distinction. You're quite right. It is for the soul. He was good for the soul.
He was.
Last year,
Last year, chicken soup. This year, chicken salad.
He was better for the soul than the body, really. And look, I think Bruce is still popular. I still think there's a broad acknowledgement that the Canucks have failed him more than he has failed the Canucks. I also think there's a broad acknowledgement that he has not been treated fairly here. But I do wonder where the fan base is on this, Coach, because I think it's also clear there is no structure. I think it's also clear that some of the strategizing is part of the problem here, particularly in a week where we see Curtis Lazar and others out there trying to win a game in the late stages as opposed to Andre.
And then Kuzmenko comes in and makes the difference.
Yeah, exactly. But since it is so out there and with such assuredness from some reports, what do you think of Rick Tocchet as the next coach of the Canucks?
Yeah, do I think he's the right fit? I don't know. Based on his track record in Arizona, he didn't have much to work with there, and what he did have to work with essentially was a fairly stout defensive core, and so he leaned into that. And this group this year here in Vancouver has been fun. I don't want the fun to be taken away, but I guess I'd like to see the fun players play a little bit better defensively. But again, I mean, if you're onto a third coach with this blue line and this core, I don't know how truly you expect anything to be different. So, can you trap it up? Can you line up 5 across the blue line and those types of things? I think there are some tactical and strategical things that Rick Tocchet could do that Bruce Boudreau, for whatever reasons, has elected not to do. But I guess I look at Rick Tocchet and the way that he played, and we talked about Gino and, the era that he played in. Tocchet was a tough customer. And maybe the antidote to Mr. Positivity and Bruce Boudreau is to bring in somebody that's going to kick some butts and crack the whip and that type of stuff. But I still think this is such a flawed roster that you're asking for miracles out of the next guy. It couldn't happen for Travis Green. It ultimately happened for a short time for Bruce Boudreau. But even saying that, I mean, they didn't make the playoffs last year, and this year's been a disaster. And so I guess I'm a little surprised. I kind of thought that maybe one of the assistant coaches would be offered up and sacrificed based on the penalty kill alone. And I kind of thought that might be a move that we saw. But they've elected to keep the coaching staff intact, and I think those guys are all loyal to Bruce. And if he goes, do they all go? I know that the story is out there now that some of this delay might be in trying to secure whoever it is that Rick Tocchet wants to bring with him, because a head coach almost always gets to bring in one of his own people, and we saw that with Scott Walker last year with Bruce Boudreau. So, I don't know that Rick Tocchet's the answer, but he has ties to Rutherford and Alvin from their time together in Pittsburgh, and so often it is a people decision, and you connect dots that way, and he's got some head coaching experience, so they're not going with a raw rookie like they did with Willie D or Travis Green after him. But I don't know. I mean, he coached in Arizona. It's just so hard to fully gauge and grasp, what kind of job he did with an undermanned, understaffed, undersupported group in the Coyotes.
And what he said on his way out of there was, at his next stop, quote, "There had better be stability. There had better be strong leadership. They have to have a somewhat talented team and a commitment to winning. Those things have to be there for me to be involved," end quote. So
I hope he was on the golf course today then when Rutherford was saying what he said.
Yeah, exactly. Not a lot of stability. Can they trot out Bruce Boudreau on Wednesday? In light of what Jim Rutherford has now said, and in light of all the insider reporting, do they not just let Mike Yeo run the bench? There's all this report that there's an out clause for Tocchet with his television job, and he needs to give weeks of notice and all that sort of stuff. Can they not just, isn't it more tasteful to let Mike Yeo run the bench for 2 weeks rather than do this again? Continue to trot him out?
Yeah, I mean, I've always looked at that week off coming up here in 2 weeks' time as just
clean break.
An opportunity for a new guy to come in, unpack some of his stuff, because they head back out on the road out east right after the All-Star game. But that seemed like a natural break in the schedule, and maybe it still is. I think there's 6 games to go, but 5 of those are at home. And so I go back to, if they win against Tampa and people are into it and get the behind, I think it's hard to fire a guy after a win. It can be done, but they beat Carolina yesterday, and then the Gino news, and I wonder if the doctors weren't available tomorrow and that this thing had to happen today, because I think in a perfect world, you kind of would have let the Gino story be front and center today, but, then maybe the doctors weren't available, and then Wednesday it's a game day, and on it goes. There's never a perfect time, but 5 of the next 6 here up until that week off of the All-Star break are at home, and Yeah, I mean, if Bruce continues to win, I could see people sort of rallying behind the beleaguered head coach here. But that does seem like it would make sense too. And Mike Yeo has been an interim before. He's run his own bench, all that kind of stuff. So it feels like the pieces are there. And but Bruce loves coaching, and I think he recognizes there's only 32 jobs, and at his age, this may be the last opportunity. So, if they think that they're going to run him out of town, that's not going to happen. I mean, he's going to go down with the ship as far as he can. But yeah,
he's not quitting. He's not resigning.
Absolutely.
He's going to take the rest of Francesco's money for whatever is owed for the rest of the year and wait till they pink slip him, which could be as soon as tomorrow. Who knows? With the way this thing has morphed. Jeff, speaking of tomorrow, we will talk to you then. We have a lot of table scraps here to get to after the events of today. Thank you, my friend. Until tomorrow.
All right, guys. Thanks.